In this video we will learn how to use design pattern called bridge in context of Angular. Hello guys, my name is Dmitry Mrzhensky. In previous video we learned what is control value accessor in Angular and why do we need it. Today we will have a look at bridge pattern. Knowing these two things will allow us to implement complex material form field, which we will do in next video. Today, let's get started with bridge pattern. So here you can see widgets which we're going to implement in this video. There is a widget 1 and widget 2, and if I click refresh button, it does refreshing, and if I do the same with second one, it does the same. As you can see, they have something common, and this is the header which has a title and a refresh button. But they have completely different content inside. Inside the first one we see content which shows the weather, and the second one is completely different and shows velocity of some, I don't know, sprint, and both have different implementation of refresh mechanism as well, because most probably they would need to call different endpoints, and you can see that they using different spinners, so the refreshing strategy is completely different. So, okay, let's start to implement these widgets. In order to save your time, I did some small preparation and I created the patterns example module where I will be showing these examples. And let me quickly show you what I have done here. So I will start with pattern example module, and here's the pretty simple stuff. I just declare my components, and then I do import of all necessary models which I need to make this component properly work, and I also export some components which I'm going to use outside this module. Then I will show you widget wrapper. This is the component which, very simple. It's empty inside. It has some very simple template. There is the header, which we saw just a few seconds ago. There is the section where we are going to render the dynamic content for our widget wrapper. And it also has some, I don't know, CSS styling. So that's nothing interesting here. Then we have another widget, so it's already concrete implementation of some concrete widget. So the first one is a velocity widget. You can see this is also a very simple Angular component. It has some methods, which first one is load. It simulates the HTTP call to the server, and refresh. It also simulates the refreshing mechanism, and it also has very simple template. We have the spinner, which is being shown when we do refreshing, and also some style was attached during the refreshing, so it will decrease the opacity of content, and there is content itself. And the very similar thing I have done for weather widget, so also you can see similar logic inside. There is just different naming, and that's it. And the template also you can see quite similar, but just different loader I'm using here, and a little bit different content. So that's pretty much it. The last thing what I'm doing is, of course, I import my component module into the imports in my app modules TS file right here, right? And that's pretty much it what I have done. And now let's maybe render these three components and see how they look independently. I will comment the component from previous video about value accessor, and I will render here my app widget wrapper first, and then we have app let's say weather widget, and also we have velocity widget, so velocity. All right. And let's go to the browser and see how they look like. So yeah, you see they were rendered independently. So We have independent wrapper, where we have our common template, our title and refresh button, and we have the concrete widget which shows weather, and concrete widget which shows the state of our sprint. Okay, our next task would be to render this concrete widget inside our widget wrapper. So we want to reuse this whole wrapper, this HTML, right? And we want to just replace the dynamic content of our widget. And in order to do this, I will use the ng content, or it's also called content projection. And I will go to widget wrapper content, and inside the section tag I will use ng content. And how works this ng content? If we put something between text of this component, as example the weather widget, so this weather widget will be rendered instead of this ng content. So let's have a look. I will save it. I will save this part. And if we reload, we see that our concrete weather widget was rendered inside our wrapper. And if we do the same but with this velocity, I will comment this out, we will see that now our sprint widget was rendered inside our widget. So the first problem solved. And the next thing what we have to do is to trigger somehow the refresh mechanism of this concrete component when we click the refresh button in our widget wrapper. And to achieve this, we need to do two things. The first one, we have to create the handler of for the click button, and the second thing, we have to somehow get the reference to this component and trigger the refresh method there. And let's start with the implementing the click handler. So I will go to our widget wrapper. So here we go, widget wrapper, and here we have our button, and I will do the next. So if we click on this button, we will trigger on refresh method. And I have to create this method in my TS file as well. So I save it here, I go to my TS file, and just below this ng init, I will create our own refresh method. Now I want to get the reference to the component which I'm rendering instead of our ng content. So in our case, it's velocity widget. And I can do this using content child. So let's go to window widget wrapper. And here in the top, I will just import the content child decorator. This content child will allow us to get reference to our component which we are rendering here. So in our case, it's velocity widget. So I have to tell here that here I get the reference to velocity widget component, and we'll assign this to the variable or property which is called widget, and also it will be type of this widget component. And on refresh, because I have already the reference to our widget, I can trigger our refresh method. And if I save, and I will go to our browser and I click refresh, and we can see that refreshing mechanism was triggered. But what will happen if we, instead of our velocity widget, we will add the weather widget? Let's have a look. So I will go to our app component, and I'll just comment this out and uncomment our widget, or weather widget, sorry. And if we go to browser, click refresh, nothing is happening. And if we open our debugger, we see that we have an error here, and this error says that cannot read property refresh of undefined. And it makes sense because if we have a look on in our wrapper, we see that we're trying to get reference to some concrete component. In our case, it's velocity widget, but now instead of velocity, we have the weather widget. So that's why it was undefined. And how we could solve it, we could actually create another one, content child, but in this case we could rename it to weather widget. But in this case we have the reference not to velocity but weather widget, right? And of course I have to import this here. And now we have also reference to our weather widget, right? And we could do the next ugly thing. We could do some if statement, and we could check if the widget exists, then trigger refresh for this widget. Then if, as example, weather widget exists, trigger refresh method of this weather widget, correct? And yeah, it could work. We can go to the browser and check one more time. So if I click refresh, and indeed it works perfectly as we expected, but do you see any problems here? If you don't, then let me a little bit complicate the things, and let's say that when we do ng-on-init for our widget wrapper, we want also request some data. So we have to do the next. So inside the widget, inside the ng-on-init, we have to call the load method, and here we have to call the load data. And of course we have to say here that static true. I need this because I'm using these references in ng-on-init, and usually if it's static false, which is default value, we can access this only in ng content init hook. But if I want to access this reference before change detection run, I have to use static true, and it will be available on ng-on-init lifecycle hook. And yeah, it should work perfectly. But again, our problem. You see that every time where we have to trigger some method of our widget, we have to do this if check, and you see we have only two concrete widgets so far, but you can see how messy it looks like already. And can you imagine if we have 5 or 10 variants of the widgets? So we have to find some better and flexible solution, right? So I would be satisfied with the solution when we would create another abstraction layer which could be represented as some token as example, and then somehow magically it would resolve the proper component instance for us. And that's a good idea actually, and we will implement exactly this. But before to implement this, before we start to build this abstraction layer, we have to unify the public API of our concrete widget component. So as you can see that our velocity component uses method load to load some data, and our weather widget, uses the load data. So we have to create some interface which unify the public API for these concrete components. So let's start with creating our interface. So I will call it widget interface.ts, and inside here I will export interface, which I will call widget, and inside this interface I will define the load method, which is just a function which returns void, yeah, means nothing. And then we have also refresh method, all right, which also returns void. And now our velocity and weather widget should implement this interface. So let's do it. I will go to our velocity widget and I will add here implements widget interface. Yeah, don't forget to import this here at the top. And the same thing I will do for my weather widget. If I will go to our weather widget, and here we will do the similar thing, then I have to import the widget, and now it complains that we incorrectly implement the interface widget. There should be a load method, and because our load data does the same what should do load data, we will just rename it, and now the error is gone, and now our component has the same public API. So yeah, I will save it also here. Now, as I said earlier, we have to create some token, which will be working as our abstraction or bridge. You can name it as you want. And I will create the new widget, new file inside the widget folder, and I will name it like widget.token.ts. Right? So, and here inside it will be constant. I have to export this constant. The name will be widget, and it will be the instance of injection token. Injection token. For whatever reason, autocomplete doesn't work for me, so I will import manually. So I have to import from Angular common, not core, I believe, and we import injection token, and the value of this injection token will be some string. I will call it also widget, and we have to also define the type which will contain this value. So we say that we expect that the value of this injection token after resolving will be something, some class instance which implements this interface. We don't know which exactly class will be there. Either it will be weather component or velocity component. We don't know. We just know that will be instance of class which implements this load and refresh method. That's actually everything what we have to know about this, right? And then we have to write this resolver. So we have to do the next thing. For every our concrete widget, we have to provide this token. So what we will do in providers, we say that provide widget token, and then we say that if some directive or class or whatever tries to access this widget, please use existing instance of our class, so weather widget component, like this, right? So once we try to access this, it will be resolved as an instance of our this weather widget component. And of course the same thing we have to do for our velocity widget, and I will just place it here, and I have to import the token, and I have to replace weather widget component with velocity widget, because here we want to resolve it like this. So we have to create reference to our velocity widget component. All right, that looks good. The second thing we have to do is to adjust our wrapper component. And now, instead of trying to get reference to our concrete velocity widget component, we will try to get access to our widget token, which we created. So like this. and now it says that we can assign only component and directive, but actually you can also do access of this injection token, but you have to use this as any trick, and with next Angular release it will be fixed, so you will be able to use it without this hack. And then we have to replace our velocity widget component with our interface which we created. As I said, that we don't know which exactly instance will be resolved. We cannot do it. Just know that there will be the implementation, some class which implements our widget, right? So we can we should do it here, and we can remove this part, and also we can remove our weather widget also here, and we don't need this check as well anymore. Then we can remove this part and this as well. And now, for whatever reason, our dev server is down, so I will restart. Okay, it's there, and now we can go to our widget and check if it's working. Yeah, I can trigger the refresh for our weather component, and now let's try to replace it with our velocity component. I will save it, try one more time. Yeah, it was reloaded, and I click refresh, and we see that refresh mechanism was triggered also for our velocity widget, right? And let's maybe create some other instances with different widgets inside, and we can see now there are two like independent things which handle the refreshing independently. And now let's try to recap this everything to get the complete picture. And yeah, we defined the velocity widget as example between this widget wrapper. In widget wrapper, we're trying to get reference to the widget, to our kind of bridge. And this, so we're trying to request this widget, then it goes to the child inside. In our case, it's velocity widget, and says, hey, do you have the widget? Yes, I have. So I have injected this token. So what the value of your token? It says use my existing class instance. So use this velocity widget component. And then inside this widget wrapper, inside this widget, we get the reference of our velocity component. And because we have the unified API, we can call the load, refresh, and yeah, we kind of, our interface guaranteed that we have implemented this method. And the similar happens for our app widget, weather widget. And we also in wrapper, we try to access the widget. In this case, we have the weather widget. So it go to weather widget and ask, okay, you have widget, what the pointer of this widget, and this is our instance of our widget component. And inside our wrapper, we get the instance of our weather component. Okay, that was it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it was somehow clear for you, because I know that this topic is kind of hard to understand. However, now we know everything to proceed with the complex material form field, and we will build this in my next video. So subscribe to this channel right now if you don't want to miss it. Leave your comments, leave your feedback, positive, negative, whatever, and have a productive week. And thank you for your attention, and see you in the future.